And again, I go back to Anthony Albanese. He's got a problem because his values don't exactly align with the Trump administration. And Anthony Albanese does not want to be embarrassed on the world stage. He ought to tread very carefully, I think.
Well, in direct opposition to Trump, I would say, everything that Albanese stands for.
Well, pretty much.
Penny Wong.
He did come out strongly and make a statement about Australia and his support for Ukraine and President Zelensky, which is all good and well, but during a week when he's been utterly inept, he hasn't actually stood up for Australia whilst we've got Chinese warships not far from our borders doing God knows what without advising us, sometimes starting these very aggressive manoeuvres and then telling us about it later. And he just seems to be shrugging the shoulders and going, well, strictly speaking, they're not breaking any international laws, they're in international waters. Why are they here and doing these exercises so close to us? Obviously, it is sending a message and it's not a friendly message. And I would like to see the Prime Minister be a little bit more animated, a little bit more outraged on our behalf and making a stand for Australia. That's, I think, would fill people with a great deal of confidence that the Prime Minister is seeing what's happening and he's not okay with it, and he's bold enough and strong enough to make that clear to the Chinese Communist Party instead of kowtowing to them endlessly.
Well, Scott Morrison has come out and said that he finds Albo's reaction to the Chinese extremely disturbing. And, of course, Scott Morrison was great in standing up to the Chinese that was one of the highlights, actually one of the best things that Scott Morrison did. But, James, we've now got the news that Peter Dutton is saying this morning, 35 new fighter jets, billions of dollars to be spent on that, and that's a good time to come out with this announcement. Albanese and the Chinese, weak stuff.
I'm so glad Dutton's buying stealth fighter jets. Elbo would probably come out and buy a few new Virgin jets so we could have some Virgin pilots patrolling the borders. I just could not believe the fiasco we had this week, where we are assured by government ministers that, we had the highest level of surveillance.
Yes.
If you are surveilling Chinese warships and you don't notice they're firing live rounds...
You don't notice them, yeah.
and that's the highest level of surveillance. And Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, to say that, well, this wasn't a real threat, therefore our response is irrelevant and does not matter. I mean,
really?
if this... That's what he said. He said it wasn't a real threat. It was so real, 47 jets had to be diverted. I'm pretty sure commercial airliners thought it was a real threat. The other thing that the Defence Minister said is he said it's not a concern that our close allies, New Zealand, who were partnering with us in this surveillance, didn't get the message to us until, 40, 50 minutes later?
After.
And he dismissed that as unimportant. It gives you zero confidence in this government's ability to defend us at all.
Absolutely.
Well, they don't even seem to have the will, let alone do we even have the ability to do this. And I'll be talking about this after the break, but Australia possibly should stop antagonising some of our greatest allies during this period, because just finally on what Albanese said in terms of the Ukraine deal, we're also negotiating an exemption to tariffs against Australian steel, aluminium. Again, I would just advise some caution, because Australia's interests should be at the very top of the Prime Minister's priority list, above everything else, above virtue signalling, about tweeting out something that he thinks is going to be popular. What he's got to be interested about is Australia First strategy. He might want to call it something else, because that sounds a bit like the Trump agenda, but this is what Australians want. We want to have a Prime Minister that prioritises our country and our interests and our living standards and our safety above all else. And I don't think any sort of reasonable person can look at the last 2.5 years and say that.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.